32 teams in 32 days. This is episode 25, the Tennessee Titans episode. Let's welcome in Michael Gallagher, reporter for the Nashville Post. Michael, what's going on?
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, glad to have you in. So, safe to say it was a disappointing end of the year. A lot of people, including myself, thought the Titans would fall off a bit last year. They lost a couple pieces, but they took advantage of a weak division, won double-digit games, came up pretty short against a team they dominated in 2019 and had already beaten in the regular season in 2020. How disappointing was the playoff game against Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean it's got to rank right up at the top of one of the most disappointing parts of the season. Maybe Jadeveon Clowney and Vic Beasley top it a little bit, but they, like you said, they had their way with the Ravens last year and making it to the AFC Championship game, and then they finally break the 9-7 trend. They win 11 games, and they can't seem to get to that next level. Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill can only do so much, and kind of, I'm sure we'll talk about this, the lack of a pass rush did them in again. It happened, against Patrick Mahomes 2 years ago. Towards the end of the game, Lamar Jackson just kind of took over and they couldn't stop him. We saw what happened when they couldn't do that. You can only get so much production out of a defense that is, we can talk about Shane Bowen too if you want to. You can only get so much production out of a defense that doesn't really have the playmakers it needs or the coach kind of calling the plays that it needs. But yeah, it was definitely disappointing considering where they had went the year before that.
Arthur Smith is gone. How different do you think the offense is going to look? And talk to me a little bit about tight ends coach Todd Downing, your new offensive coordinator.
I don't think the offense will look too much different. I think one of the reasons why they went with Todd Downing is Mike Vrabel and John Robinson are very big on this idea of continuity. It's kind of, that was the downfall of Marcus Mariota, as you could say, the lack of continuity he had. So kind of keeping in line with that, I think that's why you saw Todd Downing get promoted. I don't think he's going to change up too much. You can expect a very big dose of Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill working the play action, kind of sticking to what they were doing last year. I don't really know that much about Todd Downing. I know that he's thought of very highly around the league. The players love him. Everybody that we talked to loved the move. They said they wouldn't have rather had anyone else kind of take over for Arthur Smith. So yeah, just kind of one of those things where Arthur Smith was promoted a couple years ago, and it was kind of a head scratcher. No one really knew who he was. They're like, is he really equipped for this job? He did really well. Took 2-3 years, got himself to a head coach position. Not saying Todd Downey's going to be head coach in 2 or 3 years, but the last time the Titans promoted from within, it worked out really well.
Yeah, it's interesting because everyone says when you hire a defensive coach as your head coach, your offensive coordinator position is going to be a revolving door for multiple years. Titans are now starting to see that they have a successful defensive head coach. Arthur Smith comes along, wins, scores points with his unit, leaves. So now it's the Titans are kind of in there this initial stage of, okay, we're going to need to find, offensive coordinators every now and then.
Yeah, the good news is Todd Downing isn't exactly walking into, a black hole of talent. He does have Ryan Tannehill, regardless of what people think about him. The numbers say he is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. First 5-6 games, he was in the MVP conversation. Derrick Henry, the last 2 seasons he's put up, it's kind of hard to argue that there's a running back in the game better than he is right now. A.J. Brown has developed into that number one receiver that the team really hasn't had since Derek Mason left. They do lose Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith, but I have a feeling they'll probably address those 2 positions in the draft. I like Josh Reynolds. They signed him to kind of take Corey Davis's spot. I think he's not trying to hold it against him that Jared Goff has thrown him the ball the last 3 years. Ryan Tannehill definitely will be an upgrade over that. But I do like Josh Reynolds and what he brings to the team. And they're really high on Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I know no one really saw a lot of him last year, but just from everything the coaches and scouts have said about him, they're really high on him and that he's someone that is going to be pushed. They're going to give him a shot. And I think their offense is, obviously Arthur Smith and his play calling will be missed. Todd Downing will probably have a little bit of the same thing, but I do think that their offense is going to be right in line with where it was last year.
Yep. You mentioned it. Ryan Tannehill has resurged his career the last 2 years, played his way to a huge contract. Now year 3, his offensive coordinator is gone. 2 of his 3 big weapons are gone. Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith out the door. How does this offense counteract that? You mentioned Josh Reynolds. We'll talk about that later in just a second. But losing two of your three big weapons, like this was huge for Tannehill because he didn't have that in Miami. He also had to suffer from Adam Gase. So coming over to Tennessee with a great head coach, a good offensive coordinator, and weapons, now with just AJ Brown there, not really a reliable tight end, and then Josh Reynolds, who wasn't a number 2 or even a number 3 in LA.
Yeah, the good news is for Tannehill, he can turn around and hand the ball off to Derrick Henry. That's going to make his life exponentially easier. Even if he's not having, doesn't have his A game as we saw many times, you just give it to Derrick Henry and let him go to work. That obviously will be his best friend going into this next season. AJ Brown, hopefully he dealt with a lot of injuries, missed a game or two. What's crazy is he was really good last year and he was playing injured most of the year. I don't think we've still seen AJ Brown 100% fully healthy at his best, and that's kind of crazy to think with the numbers that he's been putting up. He will obviously be featured in the offense a little bit more. I do like Josh Reynolds. I'm not going to say that he will replace everything Corey Davis did. Corey Davis is probably one of the best run blocking receivers in the game. Josh Reynolds says he likes to stick his nose in there and block. We'll kind of see how that goes. But I actually really like the fact that they kept Anthony Firkser. Anthony Firkser is a very underrated player. He is really good at catching the ball. He's known as the hands guy in the tight end group. If they don't draft another tight end or if they don't sign anyone, and you roll with Anthony Firkser as your number 1 tight end, you could do a lot worse. I'm not saying he's going to put up Jonnu Smith numbers, but I do think having him as that security blanket for Tannehill will be really good because he is someone who's reliable, who can go over the middle, he can catch the ball, he pays off dividends in the red zone. They're probably not going to be as dynamic last year because, like you said, losing Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis, those are 2 big hits. But I guess my answer would kind of depend on what they do in the draft. If they get any one of the top 8 receivers to kind of come in, play in the slot, play number 2, maybe move AJ Brown around. If they get any one of the tight ends, I mean, Brevin Jordan, Hunter Long, there's a lot of good guys to pick from. If they get any one of those guys in the draft, I think they could be set up pretty well.
Yeah, and it's because the Titans last year they had a premium pick, spent it on Isaiah Wilson. Now, looking at huge holes on your offense that haven't been there in forever. Ryan Tannehill has had 3+4 weapons forever. They also lost Khalif Raymond, who I thought was one of the more underrated guys on the receiving market. Got pennies to the dollar with Detroit. Did you at least expect the Titans to maybe go after him and re-sign him, or at least try?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little surprising that they just kind of let him walk, didn't really put up the fight. He was the last probably 2 years was their main downfield threat. He just had this really good ability to get behind the defense, and by the time the safeties turned around and saw where he was, they were 10 yards away from him, and he was pulling in 40, 50, 60-yard passes. He also, I think his ability as a punt returner and kick returner was also very underrated. Just the speed aspect that he brought to the game. He was a difference maker. He affected the game just in different areas other than just going out, running a route, catching the ball, making a first down. But if they let him go, I mean, as we know, it's the NFL. These coaches and general managers plan these moves months in advance. John Robinson obviously knew Khalif Raymond was going to be a free agent, didn't make an attempt to keep him. So that tells me that they're either eyeing someone in the draft or there's someone else on the roster, maybe like a Nick Westbrook-Akeen, that they want to give another shot in Khalif Raymond's role and see how he does.
So the Titans marquee signing Bud Dupree, multiple time holder of the franchise tag. He comes in on a huge deal, replacing Clowney. I think that's an upgrade, especially since the production or lack thereof the Titans got from him last year. What does this do for a pass rush that was one of the 3 worst in the league in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, Jadeveon Clowney had 0 sacks last year. So, I mean, theoretically, I would be an upgrade over Jadeveon Clowney. I do like Bud Dupree. It kind of worries me. You never want to give $80+ million to someone who tore their ACL and I think it was like week 12 or 13 last year. Whether he's going to be fully healthy, you worry about him kind of trying to do too much, rush his way back, kind of speed up his rehab so he can be there. And when you have your ACL reconstructed or have whatever he is having done, you never know how he's going to be. You always hear they should be as good as they were, but they may not be the same player over and over. Adrian Peterson kind of set the example of how to come back from an ACL injury, but I like the signing if he's healthy. It's a wild card. There's a lot of money to gamble on someone who's coming off that big of an injury, but the reward is just really great if he is the player he was last year. Obviously, he was benefiting from playing with that Steelers defense and playing next to TJ Watt. But Bud Dupree he was highly regarded when he was coming out in the draft out of Kentucky. I know that he has a reputation of being that game wrecker that they thought Clowney was going to be, and I think putting him opposite Harold Landry is gonna be really a really good thing. Also, with the signing of Danico Autry, putting him on the defensive line with Jeffrey Simmons, you're looking at a potential top 10 front seven if all things shake out, everyone's healthy, stuff like that. So I really like him. I really hope that he comes back and he's healthy. This team really needs pass rush help. You can't really get through a season and be a legit Super Bowl contender getting 19 sacks over the course of a 16, which will be 17-game season next year. I just don't see how they do that again. I'm sure they'll probably draft a pass rusher or two as well. They really, there's a lot of good edge rushers they can get in the third, fourth round. But yeah, I really like where they were going with Bud Dupree. I would like to see them maybe draft another edge rusher or two to kind of rotate in and out, so it's not all the Bud Dupree show, because like I said, he's coming off that ACL injury. You don't want him to do too much early on.
Yeah, and not only sacks, because people don't like sacks. It's one of those old metrics. There's pressures now. There's QB hits. Titans were pretty much last in those too. So you can't just say, oh well, they didn't get sacks, but maybe they got pressures. No, they didn't get any of it. And looking at some of the PFF numbers, it's pretty mind-boggling for a team that won 11 games to just not attack and just had the inability to get to the opposing team's quarterback. But yeah, you mentioned it. Danico Autry is a huge addition, in my opinion. A player that a lot of Colts media that I've talked to like a lot. He didn't re-sign. Instead, the Titans steal him from a division rival. What was your reaction to that?
I was very surprised that the Colts let him go. He's been one of their more consistent players. And not only that, but he's putting up 7, 8, 9 sacks on a defensive line. And I mean, I remember when Titans fans were making a big deal when Javon Curse was getting 10 sacks a season. If Danico Autry comes in and gets you 9, I mean, you should be over the moon with that. And a player of his caliber, you pair him with Jeffrey Simmons. They did lose Daquan Jones this morning. He signed with the Carolina Panthers, but they do have some nice rotational pieces. Jeffrey Simmons just needs help. He was a beast last year. He was by far the best player on the defense, probably for the first 10, 12 weeks of the year. You pair those two together, and then you also have, Harold Landry, Bud Dupree. You have some edge rushers coming after the quarterback, and all of a sudden the Titans aren't really a pushover, because I feel like a lot of the teams that played them last year weren't really worried about their front seven. They weren't really worried about having a pass rush come at them. And when you give a quarterback that much confidence that he can stand back in the pocket for 5 seconds, kind of pick what he wants to do and unleash the ball, that makes life very hard for your defensive back. So I feel like having Danico Autry along with Bud Dupree and just the improved front seven play that they're going to get this year will also be very beneficial to the secondary, because they're not. I feel like last year the secondary kind of was like, well, the game is going to be made or broke with us. If we don't stop the receivers, like, we know the quarterback's not going to get sacked. So I think it'll take a lot of pressure off of those guys.
Right, and cornerback room, the release of Adoree Jackson shocked most people. He's gone. Malcolm Butler's gone. They brought in Janoris Jenkins. So what are your overall feelings on what that position looks like right now?
I don't really know. I've thought about this probably for the last 2 or 3 weeks of, are they better, worse, or the same? And losing Malcolm Butler, that hurts. He was very good last year, age 30, 31. You kind of expect players to be on the downturn in their career, and he had the best year of his career. I understand letting him go. He's over 30, saved you $10.2 million. That was kind of a move we all saw coming. The Adoree Jackson move kind of surprised me. Yes, it saves you over $10 million, but with Corey Davis leaving, cutting Adoree Jackson, you lose both of your first-round picks from that year. On top of the Isaiah Wilson debacle, those are 3 first-round picks in the last 3 or 4 years that aren't on your team. John Robinson will have a lot of explaining to do if that continues to become a trend. But Adoree Jackson played in 2 or 3 games last year, I think. Didn't really have that big of an effect at all. I understand letting him go. He's still, I think, like 25, maybe 26. I still would have liked to seen what he could have done this year if he was actually healthy. But I do think Janoris Jenkins is a good addition. He's a solid player. I think he will kind of be the catalyst for that cornerback room. Christian Fulton played, I think, 6 games last year. He was on and off the field with injuries, a couple of bouts with COVID on the COVID list. He did have an interception. He looked really good early on in the first game or a couple games that he played. I think it just kind of depends on how he takes that transition from year 1 to year 2 and how he develops. Kevin Johnson, they're probably penciling him in the slot to be their nickelback. I have kind of mixed feelings on him too. He was a former first round pick, but he kind of really flamed out after his first year. I know Mike Vrabel loves going and getting guys and players that he's familiar with. Maybe he can work something there, but I really do think they need to address cornerback probably in the first or second round. And I think they probably, if they can, they need to come away from the draft with at least 2 corners.
Yeah, and adding on to the wide receiver position, the edge position, ton of needs on this team that again won 11 games, and part of that I think has to do with you got to keep bringing in young talent each and every year. And the Titans didn't really do that last year. They whiffed on Isaiah Wilson. They kind of reached for him. He had 99 percentile arms, and that's about it. Most people in the draft world agreed he did not have first round tape. Then they took Christian Fulton out of LSU at 61, who most people agreed was a good pick. He just didn't play that much. And then Darrington Evans in the 3rd round. So just 3 premium picks, just pretty much no production from that. Yet they still won 11 games. Now 2021 draft, they're left with 3 pretty big holes on the roster when you add on the fact that they had 2 major skill positions leave. How big is this draft for them?
I think this could be the draft that defines John Robinson's career. And I know that's kind of hot take-esque, but Isaiah Wilson is the biggest draft bust in this team's history. And I mean, I've never seen a career go up in flames as quickly or as gloriously as he did. Sadly, it took Miami less than 2 weeks to realize what they got themselves into. They cut him, didn't think anything of it, cost them a 7th round pick. You really just, you kind of feel for John Robinson because there were a lot of other really good players in other areas of need at their position last year when they took a chance on Isaiah Wilson. And to his credit, he did say all the right things. I mean, we did our draft interview with him after they took him virtually, and he sounded like he was a guy that was raw, wanted to come in, work his tail off, and kind of prove that they did the right thing by taking a chance on him. And then, I mean, I hope the kid gets the help he needs. He clearly has no interest in being a professional football player. That's fine. But he needs to get help. When you're doing donuts and you crash your car into a concrete wall, and then you're partying on a boat in Miami in the middle of COVID, and then you jumping off of a balcony on the 2nd floor at a college campus to evade the police, and you didn't even really do anything wrong. Like, there's just a lot of things going on there. But yeah, I think this draft is very crucial, not only for the fact of the Isaiah Wilson whiff last year, but like you said, receiver, corner, edge rusher, offensive tackle. They have a lot of areas of need that they need to kind of fill positions on there. And the good thing is all the positions that they need players at, most of those are fairly deep. So they could 3rd, 4th round, they're probably still getting guys that can be starters and good players.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's weird because so many teams have just great pass rushes. The teams that don't, they kind of got lucky this year because there's for my grades, I have 18 edge rushers with 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round grades. It's ridiculous. There's so many of these players. I think all of them could be starters at least by the end of year 1. Most of them at least middle beginning of year 1. It's a great year to need a pass rusher. It's a great year to need a corner. I think this corner class is pretty deep. It's a great year to need an offensive tackle. And let's go to pick 22 because that's where the Titans are this year's draft. Last year they were at 29. This year at pick 22. What position do you think that they're – so could they go BPA? In that case, maybe Rashad Bateman, if he's there. He's kind of a similar player, a kind of a faster, bigger Corey Davis, I guess. Corey Davis is more of a sideline guy. So is Rashad Bateman. What position do you see them leaning towards if they don't go BPA?
Yeah, that's always the intriguing question is, do you draft for need or do you draft based on the best player available? I personally have always been, you draft for need. If you need a receiver and there's a good receiver there, you take him. If the best player there is a running back and you have Derrick Henry, it makes no sense to take the running back because even if he's the best player available. So I think the good thing for the Titans is they can't really go wrong either way because the best player available for them is going to be a corner, an edge rusher, or a receiver. If I'm them, I did a story on the Post this morning, kind of a mock draft roundup. It's fairly split down the middle whether they should take a receiver or a cornerback. I do think Bud Dupree kind of eases the need of drafting an edge rusher early on. I think they can wait till the 2nd or 3rd round for that. But if I were John Robinson, I would look at receiver. If Rashad Bateman is there, he's very fast. He plays in the slot. He's he's someone that could be a difference maker. I would look at him. My favorite player in the receiver group outside of the top three, they're not going to get any of those guys, but I think a guy that will be there, he might even be there in the second round, but I would take him in the first round, is Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. He watching him play is just really fun. He didn't drop a single pass in the red zone last year. Overall in his career at Ole Miss, 25 targets in the red zone, didn't drop a single pass. That is something that would be music to Ryan Tannehill's ears. He played 90, 91, 92, I think, percent of his snaps came in the slot. That's what they could use. Adam Humphries gone. And he's not afraid to battle for the ball. He had a 73% contested catch rate throughout his career at Ole Miss. I think he's someone, when you look at last year, he had 80 something receptions, 1,200 yards. I think he ranked behind Devontae Smith in pretty much every statistical category. That's someone that they could use on this roster, because AJ Brown is great, but he can't do it all. Josh Reynolds is yet to be seen. He could be good, but you need 2 to 3 good receivers to kind of take the pressure off of Ryan Tannehill. And if they don't get a tight end, or if they draft a tight end who's a second or a third kind of depth guy, then having 3 really good receivers will kind of make up for that too. So if I were the Titans, I would go Elijah Moore. I could understand Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney, Terrace Marshall. I mean, there's a lot of good receivers that would be there. If they wait till round 2, they're probably looking at Rondale Moore, maybe Amari Rogers, someone like that.
Yeah, and going down the line, I did a 3-round mock draft last week on Saturday. It's interesting because there's, the top 5 or 6 receivers. They're all either big bodies, route runners, speedsters. But then it's pretty consistent after that. The next 4 or 5 guys, you have both Moore, you have Amari Rogers. They're all slot guys. So for a team that, just signed Josh Reynolds, he'll play a little slot. He'll play a little bit on the outside, but did lose Adam Humphries, who played in the slot. Could they potentially maybe trade out of 22 to get more picks, more capital, and move towards that sweet spot of, okay, there are so many slot guys, we'll just take the best guy who's there?
Yeah, that's definitely an intriguing option as well, especially what we just talked about. The Titans have so many areas of need that they need to fill. Moving out of 22, if they can move towards the end of the first round, maybe early in the second round, pick up an extra pick or two. I'm sure we all know John Robertson loves to wheel and deal. Very rarely does he like to stay in the spot that was given to him. It's very Bill Belichick-esque of him. I could see him moving back into the second round. And if the Titans come out with 2 or 3 second round picks and no first round pick, they might take that. They might rather that, because you could probably get one of the really good receivers, probably a slot guy, in the second round. If you don't get your corner in the first round, there's probably going to be a lot of guys in the second round that you can get. I know Georgia, they have Stokes and Tyson Campbell, Elijah Molden, someone that has been kind of mocked to them. It sounds kind of crazy, but Caleb Farley might fall out of the first round. I know there's a lot of injury concerns with him. He might be someone you can get early in the second round. There's a lot of really good depth in the 3 areas of need that the Titans have, which is good. So if they do trade back into the second round, I wouldn't be surprised. I could see them maybe leaving with a corner and a receiver in the second round if they do trade back.
Yep, obviously a huge draft for the Titans. They didn't do very well last April. Have a great chance this year. A ton of needs, and the positions that they need are very deep. So it's a good year to be drafting for the Titans. And Michael, you mentioned Elijah Moore. Is that who? So that's who you would take, regardless of if you're picking at 22, 29, 37. That's the guy you're taking.
Yeah, if I'm the Titans, I'm kind of keying in on Elijah Moore, and if he's not available, then I think Rashad Bateman would probably be my backup option. If both of those guys are there or are gone by the time they're picking, then you have a different conversation. I'm not really big on Kadarius Toney. I think he's more of a second rounder than a first rounder. I like Rondale Moore. He's kind of on that fringe first, early second area. Could you justify taking him at 22? Maybe, maybe not. Terrace Marshall is obviously really good as well. He came from that prolific LSU offense. I don't know if he's someone you would want to spend a first round pick on. If you fall in love with Bateman or Moore and they're not there, then I think you go and you switch and you go to cornerback, because you could probably get another good corner there. Maybe JC Horn's available. Maybe you take a flyer on Farley. It's just one of those things. But yeah, there's a lot of depth. But if I'm then, I am selling out to get Elijah Moore. I think pairing him with AJ Brown and Josh Reynolds is exactly what this team will need heading into next season.
Yep, awesome stuff. Michael, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Make sure to follow Michael on Twitter at @MGSports_. Thank you guys for listening and watching this episode of 32 Teams in 32 Days, and I'll catch you in the next one.